Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's afternoon webinar from UK Mediation. Very pleased to be with you here this afternoon. Today's webinar is all about conflict resolution and ensuring workplace well-being. So I'm Dr. Mike Talbot, very pleased to be presenting to you here today. Just a quick word about me before we begin, and I'll give you an overview of today's webinar. I started UK Mediation 24 years ago. On the back of a career as a psychotherapist. So our angle here at UK Mediation is about looking at conflict as a breakdown in relationship, looking at psychological aspects of conflict, and especially looking at what's so hard about conflict. Why do we find it so difficult? Why is it so stressful and challenging to be in conflict? How do we get stuck in conflict? And what can we do to move on from it? And especially, how can we use the services of an impartial third party? How can we use the skills of a facilitator to help us when we're in conflict with another person, to help to move on from that conflict? What's so hard about it? What's going on underneath the bonnet? And what can we do about it? So that's what we'll be talking about today. I'm delighted to see so many people joining us today from the UK and from around the world. Some people we've trained, some practicing mediators, some people who are coming at this from a number of different angles. You're very welcome to all of you to comment as we go along. And there's a chat box there if you're watching us live, and you can also send us questions by email. And we'll be very pleased as I go along to try and answer your questions or to get a dialogue going around the comments. So what we're going to talk about today, essentially, this is all about well-being. So we want to first of all think about what is workplace well-being, and to give you some definitions of that, and also to think about using mediation to resolve conflict. How do we do that? And of course, when we're working with people who are in conflict, it's a very difficult place to be. It's challenging, it's distracting, it can cause a lot of issues. And it can be a very difficult thing to walk towards mediation as well. It's not an easy thing to do, it's fair to say. And we need to know that people are in the right frame of mind. So I'll be talking about this sort of reciprocal relationship between well-being and being in conflict. If your resources are depleted, there's an increased chance you'll get into conflict, but also walking towards conflict is a very difficult thing to do. So we need to know that people are in the right frame of mind. So I'll have a few things to say about that, and mostly looking at it from the point of view of the psychological considerations. So as I mentioned, my training and background is in psychotherapy before coming into the field of conflict resolution in 1999, by goodness. I was very interested in what's going on in terms of the psychology of people's behaviour, and especially looking at the psychology of the workplace. Some of my work prior to getting into mediation was with large organisations, doing stress audits, stress management, counselling skills in the workplace, looking at critical incident debriefing, all of those things that pertain to psychological health in the workplace. So that's the sort of flavour of today's webinar. And at the end, I'll leave a bit of time for Q&A. But like I say, as we go through, if you have comments or questions, please don't be shy. And we'll try and address them as we go along. I've got a colleague watching the feed. You can email in questions as well if you'd rather. So here we are. So let's think about workplace well-being. What are we talking about? Well, really, it relates to all aspects of people's working life that could affect physical and mental health. So well-being is not just about psychological health, it's to do with all sorts of things, including the quality and safety of the physical environment. It's very hard to say that we have a high degree of well-being in an environment that's not safe or comfortable. It goes without saying, in a sense. People's attitude, the psychological contract that people have with their workplace and with their employer is important as well. So how people feel about their work contributes to workplace well-being. And also things like decisions that are made that can impact on them. I guess some of the reason we put this in today is thinking about post-COVID, post-lockdown, post-furlough, looking at blended working now, looking at people working rather more online, the clash to do with home working and office working. It's interesting how many inquiries we've been getting around conflicts that have arisen due to people who are either now being told to work from home when they want to be in the office, or being told to come into the office when actually they'd rather be at home. That seems to have really stirred the pot post-COVID, and also around work design, how things have changed, how we now default to Zoom meetings rather than face-to-face, etc. So decisions around that kind of thing, but also policy decisions that might impact on workers. These are things that always will contribute negatively or positively to people's workplace well-being. And of course, the thing I want to zoom in on today is around relationships with colleagues. This is a big deal. So how you get on with your work fellows, be that online or face-to-face, this is a big deal in terms of your well-being in the workplace. What it means if workplace well-being is not attended to, and if there is a low degree of workplace well-being, let's call it ill-being, it can translate to an impact on productivity, of course. If people are distracted or not happy or are not motivated or engaged and don't have that healthy psychological contract with the employer, it can really impact on employees' productivity, morale, a good level of workplace well-being, again, almost goes without saying, can improve people's morale, but also about getting people to work for you and retaining people. So the healthy workplace, the employer of choice, is the one in which people feel engaged, happy, good relationships with colleagues. They're involved in big decisions that might impact on them. They're in a safe and comfortable working environment. You're going to be more likely to get the people you need, and you're going to be more likely to be able to keep them. Which is, of course, a big issue, not just how it affects the bottom line, how it affects your productivity, but also things like customer interface, who you've got talking to your customers. This is a massive issue. I'm thinking about organisations who've been closing branches and laying people off, no names mentioned, some of the big ones, about getting good people and keeping them. And of course, your reputation is key. And being the employer of choice, or being the employer that people shout about, has to be a big deal in a competitive environment. So that's a very quick skip across workplace well-being in terms of how it would produce an effect on the organisation, but how in turn is people's well-being affected by conflict. So there's conflict in every workplace, it's fair to say. You could say there's some well-managed conflict. You could say there's poorly managed conflict. There's conflict that's not addressed. There's conflict which is front and centre all the time. Some organisations thrive on having an ongoing, well-managed conflict conversation. Others tend to bury it and pretend it's not there. Okay, so how is people's well-being affected by conflict? Well, when it's left unresolved and unaddressed in particular, what we find is you get higher levels of absenteeism and presenteeism. Looking at the audience, you probably know what I mean by that, but presenteeism is when people attend work but they're not working. So they're just distracted, they're not putting their weight behind their work, they're not interfacing well with the organisation or with their colleagues, they're not happy to be there. They turn up but they're not doing what the organisation would really like them to do, and they're not happy doing so. They come in with a heavy heart, with their head down into the workplace. And although they've turned up that day, they're not really doing the kind of things that would make them or the organisation happy. So morale is down, productivity is down when we have unaddressed conflict in the workplace. And of course, there are psychological issues. So what I mean by that, it's a very broad term, but we're talking about how people's psychological well-being is negatively impacted when they are constantly in an environment of unresolved conflict. That's what we're talking about. So if you are in conflict all the time and it's poorly managed or completely unresolved, how does this impact on you? What effect is this going to have on you? And what I've done is thinking about some diagnostic categories, thinking about what kind of impacts there could be in terms of people's psychological ill health when you are involved in conflict that's poorly managed or just unattended to. So in terms of those very broad categories, I'm going to mention today stress or stress-related illness. I think a lot of people are under a lot of stress a lot of the time. We do a lot of work with big organisations like the NHS, for example. High degree of burnout, high degree of stress-related illness. People are just on the edge a lot of the time, especially right now with what's happening with the NHS. So stress or stress-related illness, which is where it tips you over into actually being unwell and unable to function, unable to get to work sometimes, and if you are at work, being unable to perform safely and effectively. Anxiety, that generalized sort of anxiety that people can experience, a sort of sense of constant fear. Depression, which we all know what it is. But also it can tip over into things like obsessive behaviour or phobias. So what we've seen over the last 23, 24 years in people being referred for mediation, and when we say how long's this conflict been going on for, one of our key questions, what we like to hear is a few weeks or months, a year or so, okay, I think that's probably still manageable. When people say 14 years, which has happened with us, we think, oh dear, because the people are going to be impacted in some of these ways. They are going to be stressed, they might well be anxious and on the edge, there's going to be a degree of depression, possibly to a clinical level, to a level where they might be well served by being in outpatients of the psychiatric departments, and or there can be stuff to do with obsessive behaviour, phobias or compulsions as well. So all the ways that unresolved conflict can affect people at the psychological level are there in front of you. Unresolved conflict causes all of these things. And we're not talking about a minor problem here, we're talking about something quite significant. So in time-honoured fashion, we love to have a few statistics in our webinars, no exception today. So let's have a look. 75% of people in this survey with personnel today, it's just a few years old, it was sort of pre-COVID really, or just around the start of COVID-19, 3/4 of people reported that instances of workplace conflict had affected their mental health. That is massive. 3/4 of people say that workplace conflict has affected their mental health. The figures are going to be at least as bad, possibly worse, I would say, today. And in terms of how that impacts the bottom line as well, 1/4 of people have reported that they have taken time off due to poor mental health. So 3 out of 4 people say that conflict has affected their mental health, and 1/4 of people, so on average just under one of those, has taken time off due to poor mental health. That's a big deal. So what are we saying? We're saying that to resolve conflict would promote psychological well-being amongst your workforce, not only so that you are reinforced reputationally, not only so that you would be the employer of choice, not only that you could be seen to be satisfying your side of the psychological contract with your workforce, but also so that you can keep people at work so that they can be productive and engaged, and so they're going to stay with you. Okay, so very a blunt summary of what I've said so far, but we are pointing towards a kind of obvious conclusion really, that to be resolving conflict is probably going to be a good idea for your business's well-being. Okay, so these kind of things are coming into play when, in particular, disputes are entrenched, have been going on for some time. So it's normal that people are going to have conflicts here and there at work, stuff about decision making, stuff about delegation, stuff about perceptions of unfair treatment, communication breakdown, personality clashes, all the stuff that might lead into either formal processes, or if people are switched on, into informal things like facilitated conversations and mediation before we get into the formal stuff. But when disputes are left, when disputes go on for a long time, become more entrenched, then these psychological effects in the 4 groups I've talked about and the ensuing impact of those are going to be more profound. So key top tip to start our top tips is early resolution. So early resolution, very important. Mediation can often be useful. Those of you who are familiar with our organisation, you know we don't do hard sell. So I don't say mediation is going to solve everything. We don't say we've got a 99% success rate in mediation. It doesn't work that way. What we do actually say is if you're in an environment where conflict doesn't frighten the organisation, conflict doesn't frighten individuals, where you can actually walk towards these situations and make early resolution, then you're going to find that you're going to be nipping in the bud a lot of situations. You're not going to need mediators if there's an environment in which managers and team leaders can facilitate conversations, in which people feel empowered and encouraged to walk towards difficult conversations with one another. So early resolution, you don't necessarily have to do mediation, but mediation can often be useful. If you do decide to be doing mediation, how does that go? Quite often what happens is either for an internal mediation provision or external, whichever it is you're preferring to do, it's probably going to be referred either through HR or through a local manager. Some organisations have self-referral as well, which can work really, really well. And it's quite an empowering thing for employees to be told you're responsible for your own working relationships. The organisation supports you. If you are in a position where you want to talk to a mediation coordinator or a case manager about whether you and this colleague would benefit from coming into a mediation, then that line is open. That line of communication is open. So it could be referred, third-party referral through HR or a local manager, or in some settings, it can be about self-referral. A very empowering thing, albeit there's a little bit more consideration in how you set that up. That's how it goes with mediation, in case you didn't know. Then what happens is the mediator, internal or otherwise, would meet with parties separately to identify what's going on, the specific issues, then try and bring about a joint session between the parties. The aim of the joint session is not to do a forensic job on who's right and who's wrong, as I'm sure you know, but it's all about building dialogue, resolving people's differences and restoring communication. So rebuilding dialogue, it doesn't have to mean you produce an agreement every time. And again, we're not obsessed with the percentage agreement rates and stuff like that. What we do understand very well, and what we come at from this angle of the psychology of conflict, is how can we get these two or more people talking again? What's getting in the way of them talking? How can we get them talking again so that they are on a footing of being able to manage their working relationship with a chin-up sense of being able to communicate about things good and bad, being able to handle their differences, being able to tolerate anything to do with decision making or delegation or senses of unfair treatment, etc. So building dialogue is what we're all about, and that's what a joint mediation session would be concerned with, and ultimately working towards resolutions and actions if it's a written agreement that's needed. If it's not, then that's fine. It's just about an understanding of how we're going to interface better, how we're going to communicate better. Okay, so mediation is very good for creating this well workplace, a sense of in the workplace people's well-being is attended to. If we can rebuild dialogue between people, sometimes working towards written agreement, if we can have resolutions and actions, great. If we don't need them, great, so long as we get people having a sense of collaboration, pulling in the same direction, and having this well workplace as a consequence, and mitigating those negative effects on the business and on the bottom line. Okay, so mediation is very good for that, so long as people are in the right frame of mind to take part. So again, because we're looking at the psychological considerations today, what I want to say is that sometimes people are not in a good place to be taking part in mediation. So people are not in a good place to be taking part in mediation. Let's just take the lid off that a little bit. So the parties who are coming into mediation, if that's what you choose to do, need to be of a certain level of psychological health and mental predicament, if you like, in order to be able to benefit from mediation. Now, generally speaking, we say try mediation by default. Try mediation first. Give it a go. You've got very little to lose. It's confidential. It's pretty quick. It's without prejudice to any other process. In other words, things that get said in mediation can't be dug up again and used in any formal process. So people can speak very openly and honestly in mediation, and it's usually a good idea to try it and give it a go. But I would say bottom line of our ethical practice is making sure that we do no harm. So we've got to be sure that people coming to the door of the mediation are in a good place to be able to participate, and that it's not going to make them worse. And having seen a lot of people in a lot of very difficult predicaments, including being quite traumatized through the situation they're in, of it having been left too long, or having been handled badly, I can say that not everybody is in the right place to be able to take part in mediation, and it might not be the right thing at that time. So just to unpick that a little bit, so an individual coming into mediation needs to be of a mental predicament that they can understand that the other person might think and feel differently to them and might be having a different experience to them. And without going into the technicalities of it, there's a lot of mental illness, if you like, or stuff that's tripping over into issues to do with personality disorders, that would mean that the individual is not in this place. They cannot appreciate that somebody else would think and feel differently to them, nor be having a different experience to them. What each of the people, the participants, also needs to do is they need to be of a sufficient capacity to be able to listen to and understand how somebody else is describing how they think and feel. They need to be able to have some empathy, I guess, is to be able to step into another person's frame of reference and be able to listen to and understand their narrative about how they're doing, as well as that first person being able to describe their narrative of how they're doing. So we need to be able to, an extent, have that bridge. Part of the mediator's job, part of the psychologically informed mediator's job, is to make that happen. But I think there needs to be a certain capacity in the participants to start with. And also, I think another thing that people, if you like, need to have a capacity for is to understand that actually how you feel is affected by what I'm doing and what I'm saying. And in turn, of course, that first person is going to tell them, hey, I'm affected by what you do and by what you say as well. So a few things there. They're a little bit ephemeral, but understanding another individual can have a different experience to me. Being able to listen to and understand you and how you're saying, you're thinking and feeling, and also to have an appreciation that how I conduct myself and what I say is going to impact on you. And so long as there is an inkling of that, then we should be in an okay place to start a mediation. Now, all of this is made particularly difficult by stress and stress-related illness. It's very hard when you feel so burdened by what's going on, so exhausted, so tired, so depleted of resources, where the balance of demand and supply has gone in the wrong direction. There's too much demand and not enough supply. That these things become quite difficult. So this is where we can end up when we are stressed or gone past just being a bit stressed, but actually into having stress-related illness. A few other things that we need to do is we need to be able to understand what mediation is about, or more or less understand what the mediator is telling you. And again, his or her job is to make sure that they are getting that across in a good way. So being sensitive to the participants, a well-trained and psychologically informed mediator should know how to explain what they're going to do and should well explain what they're going to do. So being able to get that across to the parties, but they need to be receptive to it. So they've got to be able to understand what the mediator's telling them about what's going on here in terms of what mediation's for and how it's going to go. They need to be in a position to be able to have a mixture of listening and speaking. So there has to be a point at which they are able to be receptive to the other person's words, as well as being able to put their own thoughts and feelings into words. And get this idea that an agreement can be arrived at through discussion and be in an okay place to make an agreement and to stick to it pretty well. And also to expect and anticipate that the other person will do the same. So I think that needs sort of a level of arousal that allows you to engage in a discussion, that you're not too wrapped up in your own thoughts, that you're not too wrapped up in your own distress to the point where actually you can't let another person in. So if an individual is so anxious that they're not able to concentrate on what they've been told about the mediation, they're not able to refrain from speaking, or conversely, they're not able to speak when it's their turn to do so, and they're not able to appreciate that there might be an agreement that could be made between the two of us, when they've gone past that point of entertaining the notion that actually we might get somewhere here by having a debate and a discussion, then it's a difficult thing to imagine that they would benefit from mediation. Okay, so what I'm talking about really is when people are very, very anxious to the point of us calling it an anxiety disorder. So they're at such a level of arousal, such a level of anxiety, that it's hard to have a dialogue. It's hard to entertain the notion that we could possibly arrive at an agreement as a result of having that dialogue. It's hard for them to take in what the mediator's doing and saying about what we're here to do. And it's hard to imagine that that person might reach and abide by an agreement or believe that the other individual is going to do so as well. And it's really, we're talking about a high level of anxiety that might get people into that place. Okay. I think just before I go on and talk about well-being within mediation, we've had a couple of questions come in. So really good to hear your comments and questions. Thanks very much. So this is very much on the fly. I don't really know what to expect when these comments come in. So Samir, thank you for that, Samir. Do we need to address minor conflicts between people? They happen all the time, and addressing it might stir things up and make it worse. Yeah, it depends. I mean, I think the important thing, Samir, great question, is to have a culture where it's recognised that conflict is okay and it's fine to have differences of opinion. It's valuable to have differences of opinion. We should not just tolerate it, but actually prize that there are differences of opinion. Having differences of opinion brings about creativity. It increases the level to which people understand each other. It produces innovation. It produces good ideas. Elon Musk's style is to be in conflict, perpetually in conflict. We can criticise Elon Musk, but there's some fantastic innovations in his empire. There's some really bad stuff as well, but he's come up with some really new ideas nobody has ever come up with. He has creative ways of working. I don't think he's a popular guy, and he's not intending to be popular. He intends to be in conflict with people all the time. So I would agree, Samir, with the idea of conflict being to be something that's got to be prized. But your question specifically is, might we just make things worse and stir things up if we're walking towards conflict the whole time? Well, in a way, and a slightly flippant answer to that bit, Samir, would be, let's do it. Let's find out what's going on within a conflict situation. Quite often it's a misunderstanding. Quite often it's a miscommunication. Quite often it's just something that needs to be addressed positively with the two parties in a quiet room with somebody holding order, making sure that we do address what's going on between them. So I guess what I'm saying is walk towards conflict. It's there. Let's not hide from it. And my experience of doing this for quite a long time would be you cause more problems by not addressing it than you do by trying to address it, so long as it's done with a safe pair of hands. If we go in a very litigious way, in a very legally minded way, looking at evidence, looking at trying to prove points, looking at a forensic analysis of the past, it can often make things worse. But looking at it in a more future-focused, interest-based, looking at people's unmet needs, we can usually get a positive outcome, as long as you know what you're doing. Okay, great question, Samir. And we've got another one from Francis, which is, should we not engage if there's no receptivity? If so, how long? Should we not engage if there's no receptivity? If so, long? I don't actually quite know what that means, but if people are not receptive, do we leave them alone? I guess I wouldn't completely leave them alone, Francis. I think it's maybe the wrong remedy. It's fair to say that mediation's not the right thing for everybody all the time. So if people are not receptive to that idea, do we move on? I guess we do. And I think one of the important things that I'll come on to in a bit is about mediation being voluntary. And I think what we do as mediators really is try and encourage people to be receptive to it and not to insist. So we say that we encourage, but we don't cajole. And we don't want to cajole or sort of strong arm people into a process that's actually not going to do them any good. So I think to be supportive of that individual, but to offer the, if you like, the low grade challenge of saying there is a way here that we can help you and the colleague with whom you're in conflict to actually have a good conversation. But if they're, no way, I don't want to do it, that's fine. We have to take that as the answer, and we can't force people to take part. Thanks very much for your comments. Brilliant. I think some of the labels I've been using, they're big generalizations. Most people, if they have any form of mental disorder, mental illness, psychological ill health, depletion in their personal resources, it's fair to say they usually have a mixture of things. So a lot of people who have an anxiety disorder or stress-related illness might well have a degree of depression as well. So it's fair to say we can't overuse these stereotypical labels. And fair to say that we can't do one size fits all. So it's important to recognise that we have to really not generalise lessons. So on what I've done working with this client on this occasion may not work on a different day with that client or participant. And we can't it's not about having a cheat sheet. It's not about having a standard template, boilerplate approach to conflict. One size doesn't fit all. So, and the other thing I hear quite a lot when I go around, I do a lot of case supervision with mediators and mentoring with mediators. I'm particularly averse to expressions like, I know how it is for you. You never know how it is for somebody. We can have empathy with people. We can try and see the world through their eyes. We can try and imagine what it's like to be them. But certainly, I hope this is a true statement for me that I've never said that any time, either during my career as a mediator or as a psychotherapist. I know how it is for you. No, I don't. So we've got to be really careful about things like that. A delicate touch is needed, a gentle touch, I think, when you're talking with people whose resources are depleted in this way, who have any sort of compromise to their mental health. Careful about things like, I know how it is for you. And also the other thing is, we talk in therapy about this one down position. So this means you're learning from them. So I don't go bowling into any situation, and our mediators would work the same way. We don't go bowling into any situation, say, I know how to fix this. I know what's right for you. I understand mental illness. I'd never do that. I always go into a situation like that, and we train our mediators and our panel as well, and the mediators I supervise, to say, I'm going to learn from you about what's going on for you, and I can offer support. I can't offer a magic wand or a sort of a fixed kit, but tell me what's going on for you. How is it for you in this conflict with your colleague, and to try and work from that position. So trying to meet people where they are, trying to hold back from being this saviour or this fantastic expert who's going to come in there and sort everything out for you. Learn from your clients. They probably know best what's good for them. And the facilitator's role, the manager's role, the mediator's role is to offer the support so that they can tap into that resource. So what we're talking about there is being supportive, understanding parties where they might be coming from, offering that empathy as far as we can, although you'll never know quite how it is for them. But at the same time, we are offering a bit of challenge here. Mediation is challenging. Having to go into a room with the individual that you allege has treated you so badly for all of this time, that's very challenging. Having to have a dialogue with them, take turns, have a conversation, sometimes unearth aspects of the past. Inevitably, we try and talk about the present and future in mediation, but often things will arrive from the past. People are going to want to talk about how they've arrived here. That's challenging as well. You'll have different stories. The two parties will have different stories about it. So whilst we want to offer for people to voluntarily take up things like mediation or facilitated conversations, or just well-structured, difficult conversations with colleagues, that challenge, there needs to be a lot of support in there as well, before, during and after a mediation or facilitated conversation. It's when we get that balance right, so people feel supported enough that they feel encouraged and propped up enough to be able to walk towards this process, but the challenge is sufficient that something's going to happen. So we're not doing counselling, we're not doing therapy. What we are doing is offering quite a short-term intervention of quite a high degree of challenge for parties to come and start to build dialogue with their colleague, but with sufficient support that it's safe and it's going to be productive and just not too risky. The ways that support comes, it's how you relate to the client as the practitioner, showing your empathy, showing your genuine consideration. And the challenge comes from all the things I've just said, plus people inevitably are going to feel blamed. There's a general stereotype that seems to endure around mediation, which is parties coming into mediation think, right, this is about adjudication, it's about arbitration, it's about somebody who's going to be sat behind a desk there with their notepad out, deciding who's right and who's wrong and who's to blame. We know it's not that. But participants coming into mediation or facilitated conversations will often expect that that's what it's about. And that's challenging. That feels very, very scary, to go into a place where you're going to end up being the person who's told you're the one that's in the wrong. That feels challenging. And again, the mediator's job, and especially the psychologically informed mediator, should be able to deal with that. And the way we set it up and the way we run the mediation should address that, but it's often there in people's minds. Okay, and then the other thing is using shuttle mediation. So you will know, just come back there. So moderating the challenge by your interventions, checking people's needs, scaling up and down. So what I mean by that is the thing, again, in therapy. We're not doing therapy, but it's one of the very useful lessons we can learn, which is about how challenging to be. So sometimes it's a high challenge is to say, to invite a party to look at the other person and tell them what it is you want from them. That's quite a high challenge thing. Other times we might offer a lower challenge, for people just to describe, something that's less invasive, I guess. So it's about how challenging you are with clients. We scale up, we scale down, depending on how people are doing. We want some change to take place, but we don't want it to feel too risky. So how we manage the dialogue and how we manage the mediation session should be sensitive to how they're doing. Enough support that it's not risky, enough challenge that some change is going to take place. Scale up, scale down. Sometimes a scale down can be used in shuttle mediation. That's why I wanted to say that bit first. So shuttle mediation is about putting people in separate rooms and the mediator moving between the two of them. We can have an analogous thing with online mediation as well. So we have breakout rooms and we can just go and speak to one, speak to the other, speak to one, speak to the other. That's lower challenge because you're not there in the same place as the other party, either virtually or really. And the communication's going through the mediator. That can feel less challenging, less of a torment, really. We can have breakouts, we can have shorter sessions, we can have a pause, we can have a private chat with the mediator sometimes. And the other thing I would say about promoting well-being is, for those of you, and I know there are some who would understand what I mean when I say my own background, my own preferred model is in Gestalt psychotherapy. And Gestalt is very much about working in the here and now. So we're looking at the moment of the two parties being in the room and having their dialogue. That's the moment that matters. We can remember the past, we can anticipate the future, but actually the moment that really matters is when with them in the room right now, having this conversation right here. And if we can do that rather than deflecting by talking about the past events and about the history and was it Wednesday or Tuesday, was it 3 times or 4 times, or the, I guess, quite unchallenging way of making an action plan. That's the relatively easy bit in mediation, is doing the plan and the agreement. It's why we don't get too obsessed by plans and agreements, because it's not hard to two people come in a room and say, okay, let's make a plan and agreement, there we go. We could do that 100% of the time. But the tricky bit is looking at the present. They'll disagree about the past. We can spend a few minutes doing an agreement about the future if necessary, but the bit that really matters is working in the here and now of while they are in the room, eye to eye, talking about how the other one makes them feel, talking about how they are in their presence, talking about what they need from them, describing thoughts and feelings. That's the tricky bit. Okay, and really what I'm talking about, shorthand, is we are setting the conditions for some psychological contact between the two parties, by which I mean that full-on, frank and open discussion. Doesn't have to be adversarial, doesn't have to be aggressive, doesn't have to be unpleasant. It's just the moment of actually meeting eye to eye with that party, a second or two of understanding, of being able to step into the shoes of the other party. That's what we mean by psychological contact, and that's what we're trying to set up in mediation. And just a pause here. If you don't work this way, if you're more sort of a legalistic or process-orientated mediator, I've probably lost you by now. So just to say, this is one way of working as mediators, and I take my own lesson of saying not one size fits all. This is how we work. This is how UK Mediation's been set up. This is the kind of mediation that we do. So we're not legal based. We're not looking at evaluative settlement conferencing, and none of our mediators works that way either. What we do is bring about dialogue between people who otherwise have got no dialogue. So while I'm talking about this, again, I've probably said it 3 or 4 times, we're not doing therapy, but we are trying to get this conversation, this psychological contact going. That's what we do as an organisation. Okay, that was just a public health warning in case there are people that work, for example, if you're legally trained and you're coming at this from a commercial mediation angle, like an evaluative settlement conferencing angle, I've probably lost you by now. But we're setting up conditions for some contact, and whilst people do, as I was saying, need to talk about the past and offload some stuff from the past, we discourage a forensic evidence-based analysis of the history of their dispute. We don't need that, it doesn't help. But it does help to know how you've arrived at this point, and often only when they've done that will the parties be ready to talk about what they need for the future. Okay. So just to sum up this thing I was saying about the reciprocal arrangement between these two things, I think people being in a difficult psychological predicament of being stressed and finding it difficult to engage, of being depressed and finding that, it's difficult to find the energy to have a healthy interaction with colleagues, that can mean you get into more conflict. People misinterpret how you are if you are suffering from mental ill health. I'm sorry to generalize there, but I've seen it so many times. But taking part in mediation can also cause or exacerbate your psychological distress. It's a difficult thing to do, and if people are going in there with too much challenge or lack of preparation or poorly selected participants, it can it can really sort of be a too challenging thing to do. Insufficient support, too much challenge. Okay, so with that in mind, really just coming towards the end now, I think counselling support for people taking part in mediation should be normal. On our literature, and when our case managers speak to referrers, we say, if people are finding this challenging, finding it difficult, make sure that they are availing of the support that's maybe there's in-house counselling provision in an organisation, or maybe there's an employee assistance programme, or maybe there are other ways that people can get counselling support within the workplace. It's usually through an employee assistance programme, an EAP. So normalise that. It's fine and encouraged that people should get that counselling support when they're taking part in mediation. We also want to know, some of the questions we ask, our case managers ask with referrers, is that people are okay to participate and okay to proceed. And we will, in a very neutral way and equally for both parties, signpost people to sources of support if that's necessary. And just remember the principles of mediation, which three things that we come back to all the time. We've been doing this a long time, but the mediation revolves around these three principles. Don't forget, it's about working privately, the practitioner being impartial, not making any judgments about rights and wrongs, and especially the voluntariness that people need to want to do it. Okay, and finally, remember that what mediation's for. It's for, just come back to basics. So again, I would say we're not doing therapy again. Whoops, I said it. But what are we doing mediation for? We need to be very, very clear about our purpose. And I want to kind of finish with this message, or nearly finish with this message. Why are we doing this in the first place? It's not to punish anybody. It's not to attribute blame. It's not to do an investigation. It's not to discipline anybody. It is to resolve a dispute, or to prevent the worsening of a dispute, or to resolve a complaint. Or to repair and restore a relationship, okay? And whatever else happens, everything I've said today, whatever else happens, good or bad, make sure we do no harm. So our bottom line of our ethical practice around here is that whatever we do, even if we don't do any good, we've got to make sure that we do no harm, okay? So just conscious of the time, but we do have another question from David. I'll finish with this one before I talk about a couple of other things we've got around the corner. Great question, David. Thank you. What should a mediator do if a person who isn't suitable for mediation is referred to us? I think really what's on the screen, David. So if you, in your professional opinion, believe that that person's not really in a good mental predicament to be able to take part in mediation, we can decline to provide our services if we think it's going to make them worse. And I really think that sometimes with people, mediation might be the right remedy, but not now. So it has to be the right process and it has to be the right time. And a kind of supplementary answer, David, would be sometimes it's appropriate to have that person assessed in the workplace. So occupational health or a professional from, again, the employee assistance program might want to assess that individual, and it'd be good for the individual to have that assessment to know whether he or she is in a good place to be able to participate in mediation. And I think for good governance, a good audit trail should include, if there's any doubts about that person's capacity, it should include a proper assessment of whether they are in a good place to do this and mitigate the risk of actually doing some harm. So good question, thank you very much. Okay, that's pretty well what I want to say today. Just a very quick mention about a few webinars around the corner. We do these webinars every Friday lunchtime. A little link has just appeared in the chat box for you to sign up for future webinars. You just got to click on that and pick from amongst the many webinars we have available. There's a big library of webinars on there as well. And if you've been following our fortunes, you'll know that we have a sister organisation, EU Mediation. We're starting to build up stuff over on the EU site as well, which is eumediation.net. So they will be more relevant to our work in mainland Europe outside of the UK, which, again, if you follow our fortunes, you know we've set up EU mediation post-Brexit so that we can continue to work with a number of EU institutions that we have big contracts with. So webinars on UK, webinars also on EU. So what are they, Mike? Well, they are launching your mediation career on Friday, 24th of March, talking about how you get into this field. I know a few of you who've been on today are not yet trained in mediation. So if you're thinking about it, whether you train with us or someone else, a few tips about how you would do that. Choosing a training course, setting yourself up, getting your first referrals, etc. All of that in March, and then in April, digging down a little bit deeper into the model that we work with here at UK Mediation. It's something we've come up with over the last 23 years. It's basically, in case you've heard of different approaches to mediation, it's largely a transformative model in mediation with some elements of the facilitative model for problem solving. So our particular model in mediation will be, I'll be talking about that in April on the webinar there, and then in May kind of applying the relational view to commercial disputes really. So looking at this sort of division between what legally trained mediators really, I suppose, are doing in terms of evaluative settlement conferencing, looking at the strengths and weaknesses of a legal claim. Not what we do at all. What we do is concentrate on the people aspects of it. So including in commercial disputes, in workplace disputes, neighbour disputes, complaints, medical disputes, we take this humanistic view. So we are really, I suppose, humanistic mediators, not to put too, hope it's not too grand a term. We are interested in the people issues. How do we build dialogue between people, whether it's a commercial or a neighbourhood or a workplace, etc. dispute? And I'll be looking at that in May as well. Okay, so that's pretty well it for today. Thanks ever so much for attending and for your questions and comments. If you think of something afterwards, do drop us an email, or you can keep in touch with us through all the other ways. Check out our YouTube. You can like and subscribe there. You can follow us on the various channels there. Usual stuff. Check out the website. It's been revamped the last few months. Looks great. Thanks ever so much for your participation. See you again on another webinar. All the best. Have a good weekend.